Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sun sinking low over the golden sands of ancient Egypt. The heat of the day is fading, replaced by a soft, cooling breeze from the Nile. In the distance, the silhouettes of palm trees sway gently. The sky above is painted in shades of deep orange and purple, slowly giving way to the first stars of the evening. For the people of this ancient land, nightfall was more than the end of a day. It was a sacred transition, a moment when the physical world and the spiritual world seemed to draw closer together. As the noise of daily work faded, the Egyptians turned their attention inward, preparing both body and soul for the quiet hours ahead. Life in ancient Egypt was deeply connected to the cycles of nature. Every sunrise was a rebirth, and every sunset a gentle reminder of the eternal journey of the soul. Even going to sleep was seen as a small reflection of life's greater mysteries, a passage into the realm of dreams, where the gods might whisper guidance, protection, or hidden truths. So, tonight, let us step softly into their world. We will walk alongside them as they prepare for rest, learning their nightly customs, feeling the peace they cultivated, and perhaps borrowing some of that tranquility for our own journey to sleep. The air grows cooler now, the stars brighten, and our exploration begins. As the horizon surrenders its final light, ancient Egypt enters a sacred rhythm, one shaped not just by the cycle of day and night, but by the belief that each hour was part of a larger cosmic order. To the Egyptian mind, the setting sun was far more than a beautiful sight. It marked the journey of Ra, the sun god, as he descended into the underworld to battle chaos and ensure the dawn would come again. The people saw themselves as part of this eternal rhythm. Each evening was a miniature reflection of this great cosmic passage. When the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, it was a sign to align one's own spirit with the balance of the universe, what they called Ma'at, the principle of truth, order, and harmony. To live in balance with Ma'at was not only a moral duty, it was believed to affect the stability of the world itself. This is why nightfall was not simply a time to sleep. It was a sacred threshold. Passing through it without preparation would be like setting out on a journey without provisions or protection. Just as the sun god required strength to survive the underworld, people sought their own kind of strength, spiritual and physical, before closing their eyes. In quiet homes along the Nile, this alignment began in small, deliberate acts. A jug of fresh water might be poured, its surface catching the lamplight as it was set aside for the evening. The household might burn a pinch of incense, letting the smoke curl upward as an offering to the gods. And while this act filled the air with fragrance, it also symbolically cleansed the home, making it ready for the peaceful hours ahead. The night was also a reminder of vulnerability. Darkness concealed both wonders and dangers, from prowling animals to unseen spirits. To the Egyptians, it was not wise to drift into sleep without asking for the guardianship of protective deities. This is why so many evening customs had a double purpose: to relax the body and to shield the soul. Even the act of simply looking at the sky became a form of communion. The constellations, Orion, Sirius, the circumpolar stars, were tied to myths, to gods, and to the cycles of life and death. Stargazing was not idle observation. It was a way of syncing oneself with the divine order, reminding the sleeper that they were part of something vast and eternal. In the stillness of this sacred cycle, the Egyptian mind was soothed. Each action, pouring water, lighting lamps, whispering prayers, prepared them not only for rest, but for the spiritual journey that lay between sunset and sunrise. Nightfall in ancient Egypt was not hurried. There was no rush to collapse into bed, no distraction of glowing screens or blaring sounds. Instead, the approach to rest unfolded like a ceremony, deliberate, unbroken, and deeply personal. The first step was often purification. In homes both humble and grand, water was more than a necessity. It was a sacred medium. Egyptians believed that washing away the dust of the day was also washing away spiritual impurities. Some would pour cool water over their hands and feet, feeling the grit vanish into the earth. In wealthier households, small basins stood ready, carved from alabaster or clay, their surfaces catching the soft flicker of oil lamps. A few drops of fragrant oils might be added, lotus, myrrh, or blue chamomile, turning the act of cleansing into a sensory offering to both body and soul. Once clean, the skin would be anointed. This was not merely for beauty, though smooth-scented skin was highly prized. Oils were thought to preserve health, keep the body supple, and protect against the dry desert air. Myrrh oil was believed to carry protective qualities, while lotus oil brought calm and clarity of mind. Slowly, methodically, these oils were massaged into the skin, the scent lingering like a gentle lullaby in the air. The room itself had to be prepared. For many, the evening atmosphere was shaped by scent and light. Charcoal braziers might burn small amounts of frankincense or kai-fi, a complex, honey-sweet incense used both in temples and homes. The smoke curled upward, shifting lazily in the still air, filling the space with a fragrance believed to invite peace and drive away ill-intentioned spirits. Lamps were lit, but their glow was soft and golden, never harsh. Oil-fed wicks flickered gently, casting shadows that moved like water along the walls. The air grew cooler as night deepened, especially in stone-built homes, where the heat of the day slowly bled away. In summer, windows and doorways might be left open to let in the whisper of the desert wind, while reed mats helped filter the drifting sands. Some households added a final touch, a small cup of herbal infusion. Chamomile, mint, or blue lotus petals might steep in warm water, releasing their calming properties. The Egyptians valued these plants not only for their taste, but for their subtle effects, easing the mind, settling the stomach, and encouraging restful dreams. Everything about this process was intentional. The Egyptians did not separate physical comfort from spiritual well-being. They believed the two were bound together. To prepare for sleep was to prepare the body for stillness and the soul for its nightly voyage through the dream realm, a journey as significant as the waking hours of the day. The preparations were not rushed, nor were they considered optional. They were the bridge between the duties of the day and the mysteries of the night. Each small act, the coolness of water, the warmth of oil, the fragrance of incense, carried the sleeper closer to that quiet state where the body could rest and the spirit could wander freely under the guidance of the gods. In ancient Egypt, night was not simply the absence of day, it was a vast, living realm filled with meaning. As the sun dipped beneath the western horizon, the great celestial map unfolded above, each star a fixed point in a cosmic story that had been told for millennia. To the Egyptians, the heavens were not distant. They were the roof of the world, close enough to speak to the soul, and watching them was like looking directly into the writing of the gods. The Milky Way was not just a band of light, it was the great celestial river, a mirror of the Nile flowing through the eternal darkness. The stars that lined its edges were thought to be islands where spirits and deities could rest on their endless travels. Orion's bright figure was seen as Osiris, the god of the afterlife, rising and falling with the seasons. Sirius, the dazzling star that heralded the Nile's flooding, was the embodiment of Isis, watching over her people. For those who lay beneath these skies, the constellations were guides, guardians, and storytellers. Before sleep, it was common to step outside or gaze through open courtyards, letting the eyes trace the familiar patterns above. This was not idle stargazing, it was a form of silent communion. The slow act of looking up into the glittering expanse helped quiet the mind. The endless darkness and the slow drift of stars gave the body permission to slow as well, as if the heartbeat aligned with the pace of the heavens. Dreams, too, were part of this connection. Egyptians believed that sleep was a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. While the body rested, the Bay, the spiritual essence, could travel freely, visiting gods, ancestors, or even distant realms. To encourage safe and meaningful dreams, charms and amulets were often placed near the sleeping space. A small carved image of Bes, the protective dwarf god, might stand at the head of the bed, his fierce expression guarding against nightmares. The Eye of Horus, painted or etched on wood, could be hung nearby to shield the sleeper from harm during their journey through the night. Some even sought specific dreams. Priests and those seeking guidance might practice dream incubation, lying in sacred spaces, perhaps in temples of Serapis or Imhotep, and preparing the mind to receive visions. At home, this practice could be echoed in small ways. A whispered request to a god before sleep, the wearing of a particular amulet, or the burning of an incense blend believed to open the mind to divine messages. The connection between the sleeper and the cosmos was not just spiritual, it was also physical. The timing of sleep often followed the rhythms of the moon. A bright full moon might inspire longer periods of wakefulness and more nighttime activity, while the dark moon's quiet absence encouraged deeper rest. Seasonal shifts in the sky subtly influenced habits as well, tying the people not just to the land of Egypt, but to the great, endless heavens above it. In this way, night was never lonely or empty. Every star, every glimmer, was a reminder that the sleeper's journey was part of a much greater cycle, one that stretched far beyond the edge of the desert and into the eternal. To fall asleep under such a sky was not to disappear into darkness, but to step into a realm alive with meaning, guarded by gods and guided by the unblinking lights of the universe. In the heart of ancient Egypt, sleep was not only a spiritual journey, but also a carefully crafted physical experience. The bed, though not always as we think of it today, was the foundation of this nightly ritual. For the wealthy, it was a work of art, a wooden frame, often made from imported cedar or acacia, raised off the ground on short legs carved into the shapes of lion paws or bull hooves. The head of the bed would slope slightly upward, supporting the body at a gentle incline. At the end where the sleeper's head rested, a curved headrest of wood, ivory, or even alabaster replaced the soft pillows we know today. This headrest, designed to cradle the neck, was thought to keep the sleeper's spirit aligned and protect them from harm during the night. For the common people, sleep could be simpler but no less intentional. Many rested on mats woven from reeds or palm fibers, laid directly on the floor or on a low platform. Some added layers of linen or wool blankets, their texture softened by repeated washing in the waters of the Nile. Even in humble homes, care was taken to create a space that felt safe and separate from the bustle of the day, perhaps a small corner shielded by curtains or woven screens. The bedding itself was always a matter of comfort and climate. In the heat of summer, the lightest of linen sheets, cool to the touch and breathable in the warm night air, would be enough. During the cooler months, thicker woven blankets or woolen covers might be brought out. Linen, prized for its smoothness and purity, was more than just a material. It carried symbolic weight associated with cleanliness and divine favor. To sleep wrapped in linen was to be in harmony with the gods themselves. For the upper class, bedding could be richly decorated. Colored linens dyed with plant-based pigments brought warmth and personality into the sleeping space. Patterns of lotus flowers, papyrus reeds, or geometric borders might be woven in, carrying both aesthetic beauty and symbolic meaning. The lotus, for instance, represented rebirth, a fitting motif for the daily death of sleep and the resurrection of waking. Mosquitoes and insects, especially in the lush river valleys, were a constant challenge. In wealthier homes, fine netting could be draped over the bed, a practical yet delicate shield that added to the feeling of a private sanctuary. The scent of natural repellents, such as incense made from myrrh, frankincense, or aromatic herbs, would fill the air, serving both as a deterrent to pests and as a soothing fragrance to calm the mind before rest. The placement of the bed also held quiet significance. Some believed it was best to align the head toward the east, the direction of the rising sun, symbolizing life, renewal, and the blessings of Ra, the sun god. Others might place their beds to catch the cool night breeze through an open courtyard or window, letting the rhythms of nature shape their sleep. Every detail, from the slope of the headrest to the feel of the linen, was part of a larger philosophy. Sleep was not an afterthought. It was a sacred daily transition, and the space in which it occurred was treated with respect. Whether grand or humble, every bed in Egypt was a place where the body could rest and the soul could travel, guarded by ritual, comfort, and the silent watch of the gods. When night descended over the Nile Valley, it brought with it an entirely different world, one that was alive with its own rhythm. The sun's blazing heat gave way to cooler air, and a soft darkness settled over the fields, villages, and temples. For those preparing for sleep, the night was not silent. It was filled with an orchestra of sounds that shaped the dreaming hours. In the countryside, the distant croak of frogs echoed from the irrigation canals, their voices mingling with the gentle trickle of water flowing through the channels that fed the crops. Crickets chirped in steady, hypnotic rhythms, their song becoming a kind of natural lullaby. Occasionally, the soft rustle of papyrus reeds would whisper in the breeze, and the flutter of bat wings might pass overhead, barely audible, but part of the familiar night music. In larger towns and cities, the sounds shifted. There might be faint laughter or voices drifting from late-night gatherings, the rhythmic tapping of a craftsman working under lamplight, or the distant beat of a drum from a temple ritual that carried into the streets. The barking of dogs, guardians of the homes, could break the stillness, followed by the answering call of another from far away. But it was not just sound that filled the night. It was scent. The air itself carried fragrances that spoke of both daily life and sacred practice. In the wealthier homes, small dishes of burning incense were set in corners or near the bed, releasing gentle curls of smoke scented with myrrh, frankincense, or kai-fi, a famous Egyptian blend made from honey, wine, raisins, and aromatic herbs. Kai-fi was not only a perfume, it was believed to calm the mind, ease breathing, and invite pleasant dreams. For common households, the sense of the night might be simpler, but no less comforting. The faint sweetness of stored grain, the earthy aroma of clay floors, or the freshness of linen sheets drying in the evening air. Sometimes, bunches of dried herbs were hung near sleeping spaces to ward off insects and protect the sleeper from wandering spirits. The light, too, played a role in the sleeping atmosphere. While most of Egypt relied on the natural darkness for rest, oil lamps were sometimes left burning dimly in a corner, their flickering glow casting long shadows on the walls. In rural areas, moonlight spilling through windows or open courtyards could bathe the room in a soft silver hue, changing the entire feeling of the space. For the ancient Egyptians, sleep was not simply a time of rest. It was a vulnerable crossing into another realm. In the still hours of night, the spirit, known as the Ba, could leave the body to wander. Dreams were seen as real journeys, and in those journeys, both blessings and dangers could be found. This belief gave rise to an entire network of rituals, superstitions, and protective objects that surrounded the act of sleeping. One of the most common protections came in the form of amulets. These small carved charms were placed near the sleeper, sewn into headrests, or worn around the neck through the night. A figure of the god Bes, the fierce but benevolent dwarf deity, was a popular choice. His wide eyes, sticking tongue, and lion-like features were meant to terrify evil spirits that lurked in the shadows. Bes was not only a guardian of children and women in childbirth, he was a protector of the bedroom, ensuring safety through the hours of darkness. Another powerful guardian was Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess with crocodile tail and lion's limbs. Images of her were carved into headrests or painted onto bedroom walls, where her looming figure stood watch over those who slept. Her role was especially vital for pregnant women, as the night was thought to be a dangerous time for both mother and unborn child. Before sleeping, some households performed small rituals to invite divine favor and protection. A few drops of water from the Nile, symbol of life itself, might be sprinkled around the room. Incense smoke could be wafted through the air to cleanse it of harmful forces. In wealthier homes, small hymns or quiet prayers to household gods were recited, often invoking Hathor for pleasant dreams or Thoth for wisdom in the messages seen during sleep. Magical texts were another form of protection. Certain papyri contained spells for safe sleep, lines of sacred words that, when recited or kept under the pillow, would guard the sleeper from nightmares, illness, or attack by malevolent spirits. The belief was that these written words held the same power as the spoken ritual itself. Even the position of the body in bed could carry meaning. Many preferred to sleep with their head facing south, toward the source of the Nile's flow, symbolizing life and renewal. Others aligned themselves eastward, toward the rising sun, to ensure awakening in harmony with the cycle of Ra, the sun god. To the ancient Egyptians, the night was never entirely empty. It was a space where the divine, the spiritual, and the human all intersected. By surrounding themselves with these protections, they transformed their sleeping spaces into sanctuaries, where they could safely navigate the dream world until dawn's first light broke over the horizon. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams were not idle fantasies of a wandering mind. They were messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from the restless dead, and occasionally from darker, more malevolent forces. The dream world was a realm where the ordinary laws of life and death could be bent, where divine beings could step forward to speak, warn, or bless. Every dream, whether strange or simple, was a potential doorway to truth. The Egyptians even had professional interpreters of dreams. These specialists, often priests trained in temple schools, consulted ancient dream books, collections of visions, and their recorded meanings. Written on papyrus, these guides listed hundreds of scenarios, each paired with a specific interpretation. If one dreamed of drinking warm beer, for example, it could be a warning of illness. If a person saw themselves under a tree heavy with fruit, it might be taken as a sign of prosperity or love. Some interpretations were oddly specific. A dream of seeing a crocodile on dry land could signal triumph over enemies, while dreaming of eating certain fish might mean impending betrayal. But not every dream was straightforward. Sometimes, a person would wake with a vivid but unsettling image and feel that its meaning could not be found in a book. In those cases, a ritual might be performed in a temple's sleeping chamber, a sacred space where the dreamer would lie down, hoping to receive a clearer vision under divine supervision. This practice, known as incubation, was often used when someone sought healing or guidance for important life decisions. Gods such as Serapis, Thoth, and Horus were believed to send dreams with intentional messages. A soldier might dream of Horus granting him a weapon, a promise of victory in battle. A farmer might see the goddess Renenutet, patron of the harvest, walking through his fields, signaling a bountiful season. These dreams were taken seriously, sometimes more seriously than advice given by living people. The Egyptians also recognized that not all dreams came from benevolent sources. Spirits of the dead could appear to request offerings or settle unresolved matters. Nightmares in particular were thought to be the work of demons or hostile spirits, slipping through the veil of sleep to cause harm or fear. In such cases, protective amulets and purification rituals were recommended immediately upon waking. To the Egyptian mind, the dream was a conversation, one that could cross boundaries of time, space, and mortality. Ignoring a dream, especially one that felt urgent, was seen as foolish at best and dangerous at worst. In their view, dreams were threads connecting the mortal world to the vast, unseen forces beyond it, and to pull at those threads carelessly could unravel far more than one intended. In ancient Egypt, there was a special practice reserved for moments when ordinary life offered no clarity, when the heart was heavy with uncertainty, when illness resisted all remedies, or when the path ahead seemed hidden in shadows. This practice was known as dream incubation, and it was not simply about waiting for a dream to come. It was about deliberately inviting the gods to speak. Temples across Egypt contained secluded chambers specifically designed for this purpose. These rooms were often quiet, dimly lit spaces, shielded from the chaos of the outside world. Before a person could enter, they underwent purification rituals, bathing in sacred water, anointing themselves with fragrant oils, and sometimes fasting to cleanse both body and spirit. The priests would then guide the supplicant in prayers or chants, calling upon a chosen deity to reveal their will through the dream world. Once prepared, the dreamer would lie down on a special mat or a low bed within the sacred chamber. The air would be thick with the smell of incense, and the only sound might be the faint drip of water from a nearby basin. Here, in this heightened state of spiritual readiness, the dreamer hoped that the boundary between the physical and divine would thin, allowing the god's voice to enter their sleep. The process was not always immediate. Some might spend an entire night without receiving any vision at all, returning night after night until something came. Others would experience dreams so vivid that they awoke in tears or awe. If the dream involved the god's direct appearance, speaking words, handing over an object, or performing a symbolic action, the message was considered a powerful and unambiguous answer. Healing was one of the most common reasons for incubation. Temples dedicated to healing gods, such as Imhotep or Serapis, were especially known for this practice. A sick person might dream of the god touching their wound, or of being given a potion, or of walking through fields of light, signs that their recovery was assured. Conversely, a troubling dream could signal that more offerings or rituals were needed before health would return. These dreams were not kept private. In many cases, The priests would record them in temple archives, building a library of divine communications. Over centuries, these accounts created a map of spiritual dialogue between mortals and gods, a record of how the unseen world guided Egypt's people through love, loss, war, and peace. For the Egyptians, dream incubation was more than a mystical curiosity. It was an act of trust, a surrender to forces greater than oneself. To lie down in a temple chamber was to admit that human judgment had reached its limits, and that the wisdom of the night was now the only guide worth following. Not all dreams in ancient Egypt were gifts of clarity or comfort. Some arrived like shadows in the night, heavy, oppressive, and filled with dread. These were the bad dreams, and for the Egyptians, they were far more than just the byproducts of a restless mind. They were messages too, but of a different kind. Warnings, attacks, or signs that something was wrong in the hidden layers of the soul. Ancient Egyptian texts and dream books often recorded these unsettling visions in detail. Dreams of being chased by wild animals, of teeth falling out, of drowning in the Nile, or of walking through a land of darkness were considered deeply ominous. Such imagery was rarely dismissed as coincidence. It was thought to mean that a spiritual imbalance had occurred, that the dreamer had unknowingly angered a god, attracted the attention of malevolent forces, or allowed their ka, their life essence, to become vulnerable. The Egyptians believed that just as benevolent deities could step into a dream to offer guidance, so too could dangerous spirits enter to cause harm. These entities were sometimes described as night demons or dream thieves, beings that would try to steal the dreamer's vitality, cloud their thoughts, or implant false visions meant to mislead them. They might take the shape of monstrous animals, shadowy figures, or even loved ones behaving strangely. When such dreams occurred, they were treated as urgent matters requiring ritual intervention. A person plagued by nightmares might seek out a temple priest skilled in dream protection. The priest would perform purification rites, burn protective incense such as frankincense or myrrh, and recite invocations to banish harmful forces. Protective amulets, often inscribed with the eye of Horus, the scarab beetle, or specific spells from the Book of the Dead, were placed under pillows or worn during sleep to guard the dreamer's spirit. One of the most feared signs in a nightmare was the appearance of water turning black or blood red. In Egyptian symbology, water represented life, renewal, and purification. So to see it corrupted meant that the flow of spiritual life had been poisoned. Another troubling vision was being trapped inside a tomb, a potent metaphor for feeling spiritually buried, cut off from the light of the gods. But the Egyptians didn't believe nightmares were only punishments or attacks. They also saw them as alerts. A frightening dream could be a divine way of forcing a person to act, to reconcile with an enemy, to make an offering they had delayed, or to abandon a dangerous course of action. In this sense, even the darkest visions could carry a hidden blessing, pushing the dreamer back onto the path of Ma'at, the cosmic order. In the Egyptian view, ignoring a nightmare was never wise. The world of dreams was too real, too connected to the divine. If a dark vision arrived, it meant the gods, or something far more sinister, had stepped into the dreamer's chamber, and the only question was whether you had the wisdom to listen or the courage to fight. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not just private experiences. They could become matters of state, influencing the fate of entire kingdoms. Pharaohs, who were seen as both political leaders and divine intermediaries, often used dreams to guide their decisions, or at least to justify them. To the Egyptian people, a ruler who could read and act upon the will of the gods through visions was not just powerful, they were sacred. Many royal inscriptions and temple reliefs depict pharaohs receiving dreams as direct communication from deities. These visions were often framed as moments of divine endorsement. A god might appear to a ruler in the stillness of night, offering instructions for war, blessings for construction, or warnings of danger. Whether these dreams happened exactly as recorded is impossible to know. But in a world where religion and politics were inseparable, proclaiming that a god had spoken to you in a dream was the ultimate way to legitimize your authority. One of the most famous examples comes from the so-called dream stele of Thutmose IV, found between the paws of the Great Sphinx at Giza. According to the inscription, when Thutmose was still a young prince, he rested in the shadow of the Sphinx and fell asleep. In his dream, the god Harmakhis, the spirit of the Sphinx itself, promised him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand that had buried the monument. Thutmose claimed to have obeyed the vision, restoring the Sphinx, and in return, he became pharaoh. Whether coincidence or calculated propaganda, this story cemented his rule as something destined by the gods. Dreams were also powerful tools during times of war. Before launching a campaign, a pharaoh might claim to have dreamed of the god Montu or Amun, granting them victory over their enemies. This not only inspired confidence among soldiers, but also reassured the public that the coming battle had divine approval. Inscriptions from the reign of Ramses II describe such visions, framing his military ambitions as sacred missions rather than acts of ambition. But dreams could also warn rulers. Some records speak of visions foretelling famine, uprisings, or betrayal. These ominous dreams often prompted swift action. New temples were built, sacrifices were offered, and enemies were purged in the name of protecting Egypt's cosmic order. If a pharaoh failed to heed such a warning, it was seen not just as political negligence, but as spiritual defiance against the gods themselves. What's striking is that pharaohs understood the political value of dreams. A vision, whether real or invented, could unite the kingdom, inspire loyalty, and silence dissent. And in the eyes of the people, a ruler who ignored divine guidance risked not just their crown, but the collapse of Ma'at, the delicate balance of the universe. In this way, dreams were as much a weapon as a blessing, tools of power that could shape laws, dictate battles, and even crown kings. In the heart of ancient Egypt, some temples were not just places of worship, they were sanctuaries for dreams. These were known as incubation temples, sacred spaces where people would come, not to pray in the traditional sense, but to sleep in the hope that a god would visit them in a vision. To the Egyptians, dreams were a direct channel to the divine. And in these holy places, that channel was thought to be at its strongest. The process was deeply ritualistic. Pilgrims seeking answers, whether for health, personal problems, or guidance in life, would first undergo purification. They would bathe in sacred waters, abstain from certain foods, and sometimes anoint themselves with fragrant oils. This was not just symbolic cleanliness, it was a way to prepare the soul for divine contact. Once ready, the dreamer would enter the temple's most sacred area, often a small, dimly lit chamber, far from the noise of the outside world. One of the most famous examples of such a site was the Temple of Imhotep at Saqqara. Imhotep, the legendary architect of the Step Pyramid and later deified as a god of healing, was believed to grant cures through dreams. Pilgrims suffering from illness would sleep within the temple complex, hoping to see Imhotep in their dreams offering remedies or instructions. Many left with stories of miraculous recoveries, further fueling the temple's reputation as a place where the veil between mortal and divine was thin. The Temple of Serapis in Alexandria, though built in later periods, followed a similar tradition. Worshippers would incubate there, lying on mats or special stone benches. In their dreams, Serapis, a god blending Egyptian and Hellenistic traits, might reveal prophecies, answer questions, or heal ailments. Even in Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt, the ancient belief in dream messages endured. Dreams from these temples were rarely taken lightly. They were often interpreted by priests trained in dream symbolism, who could translate a vision's imagery into concrete advice. For instance, seeing a falcon might be read as a blessing from Horus, signaling protection, while a vision of a flooded field could be interpreted as a warning of disaster. The act of sleeping in a temple wasn't seen as passive. It was an offering of vulnerability, a symbolic surrender to the will of the gods. By closing one's eyes in a sacred space, the dreamer was inviting the divine to step into their most private realm, the mind. And for the Egyptians, this was among the most intimate forms of communion with the spiritual world. These incubation temples remind us that, in ancient Egypt, dreams were not random flickers of the subconscious. They were sought after, cultivated, and revered, gateways to truths that could not be reached by waking reason alone. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams could be gifts from the gods, but they could also be chilling warnings. Not every vision brought hope or healing. Some came cloaked in dread, carrying messages no one wished to hear. Nightmares, in particular, were not dismissed as meaningless illusions of sleep. They were believed to be deliberate signs, omens of danger, chaos, or divine displeasure. The Egyptians kept extensive dream manuals, some of which survive to this day, written in careful hieroglyphs on papyrus. These were guides for interpreting dream imagery, and many entries were grim. Seeing one's teeth fall out in a dream could signal the death of a relative. Dreaming of fire might mean that divine wrath was imminent. Even harmless-seeming visions, like eating certain foods or wearing specific colors, could be interpreted as foretelling loss, illness, or betrayal. Nightmares were often attributed to the interference of malevolent spirits or restless dead who slipped into a dreamer's mind while they slept. The boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead was considered thin in the hours of darkness, and this vulnerability made the dream state especially risky. In some cases, the cause of a nightmare was thought to be a curse or the result of angering a god, either through neglect or breaking a taboo. But the Egyptians were not helpless in the face of such visions. Protective rituals and charms were used to ward off the evil that dreams might foretell. Amulets bearing the eye of Horus or the figure of the dwarf god Bes, a fierce guardian against demons, were placed under pillows or worn at night. Special prayers were recited before sleep, appealing to benevolent deities to guard the soul during its nightly journey. If a nightmare had already occurred, the dreamer might visit a temple to perform a cleansing ritual, washing away the lingering spiritual stain of the vision. Some nightmares were taken so seriously that they could influence political or military decisions. A pharaoh or high priest who dreamed of an ill omen might delay a campaign, halt construction, or offer costly sacrifices to avert the foretold disaster. In this way, the dream world could shape the course of real-world events. For the Egyptians, dreams were not mere shadows of thought. They were living messages from beyond, and while some brought comfort, others carried the cold hand of warning. To ignore a nightmare was to risk inviting its prophecy into the waking world. In the vast pantheon of ancient Egypt, certain gods were believed to walk the pathways of dreams. To the Egyptians, these deities were not distant, abstract forces. They were active participants in the nightly journeys of the soul. Their roles varied. Some brought wisdom and healing, while others delivered warnings or demanded offerings. Foremost among these dream-related gods was Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, writing, and divine knowledge. Thoth was thought to act as a scribe of the gods, recording the truth of a dream and ensuring its message was preserved. When a vision brought insight or prophecy, many believed it was Thoth who had guided it into the sleeper's mind. Another key figure was Serapis, a Greco-Egyptian god who rose to prominence in the later periods of Egypt's history. In temples dedicated to him, worshippers would undergo incubation rituals, sleeping within the sacred precincts in the hope that Serapis would appear in a dream and offer advice or healing. This practice, while rooted in Egyptian tradition, carried influences from the Hellenistic world, blending two cultures' understandings of divine communication. Isis, the great mother goddess, was also deeply connected to dreams. As a healer and protector, she was said to send visions that could guide and comfort those in distress. Her presence in dreams often signaled safety, guidance, or the promise of recovery from illness or hardship. For devotees, receiving a dream from Isis was a sign of profound favor. Even Osiris, lord of the afterlife, played a role in the dream realm. For those seeking to connect with deceased loved ones or to gain insight from the spirits of the dead, Osiris was the ultimate gatekeeper. He presided over the dreamer's contact with the underworld, ensuring that such encounters served a purpose, though they were not without risk. But there were also darker divine influences. The god Set, associated with chaos and storms, was feared as a bringer of disturbing and confusing dreams. A nightmare under his shadow could leave a dreamer shaken for days, unsure of whether they had been warned, threatened, or simply toyed with. For the Egyptians, dreams were rarely seen as random. Each was touched by the hand of a god, whether benevolent or dangerous. And understanding which deity had left their mark on a vision was crucial, for it shaped how the dream should be acted upon in the waking world. Scattered across ancient Egypt were places where sleep was not simply a necessity, but a sacred ritual. These were the so-called temples of sleep, sanctuaries dedicated to divine dreams. In these hallowed spaces, men and women came not merely to rest, but to open themselves to messages from the gods. The practice was known as dream incubation, and it was taken with deadly seriousness. A temple of sleep was often quiet, dim, and heavy with the scent of burning incense. The air itself seemed thick, as though the veil between the mortal and divine was thinner here than anywhere else. Worshippers would arrive after purifying themselves, bathing in cool water, donning clean linen, and sometimes fasting for a day or more. This purification was essential. The gods were far more likely to grant visions to those who approached with clean bodies and clear intentions. The ritual began with prayer, often directed to a specific deity, perhaps Thoth for wisdom, Isis for protection, or Serapis for healing. Offerings of bread, honey, wine, or incense would be left at the altar, and hymns might be chanted to invite the gods' attention. Only then would the dreamer lay down, often on a reed mat or simple bedding within the temple's sleeping chamber. The night itself was sacred. A temple keeper or priest might walk silently through the room, ensuring the atmosphere remained calm and undisturbed. In some temples, priests burned specific herbs believed to induce vivid dreams, frankincense for divine clarity, or blue lotus to open the mind to visions. Dreamers would remain until dawn, and upon waking, their first act was to recall and speak their dream aloud to a priest. This was not idle curiosity. Every detail mattered. The priest would interpret the dream using both traditional knowledge and divine intuition, telling the dreamer whether the god's message brought blessing, warning, or command. For some, the dream incubation ritual brought miraculous healing. For others, it delivered answers to questions of love, trade, or politics. And sometimes, the message was cryptic, a puzzle to be solved over days or weeks. But whatever form the vision took, it was believed that by sleeping within a temple, one had crossed a threshold and spoken directly with the divine. Not all dreams in ancient Egypt were gifts from benevolent gods. Some were feared as dangerous omens, the whisperings of restless spirits, or even the touch of a curse. The Egyptians knew well that just as the world was home to both order and chaos, so too was the dream realm. Nightmares were often blamed on malevolent entities, shadowy figures from the underworld, wandering spirits of the unburied dead, or even the dreaded serpent demon Apep, who was believed to prowl the darkness seeking to disrupt the balance of the cosmos. If someone woke trembling, drenched in sweat, and unable to shake a feeling of dread, it was seen not merely as a bad dream, but as an attack. Protective measures were vital. Amulets inscribed with protective spells were kept beneath pillows or hung above sleeping places. Images of gods like Bez, the squat, leonine protector of households, were carved or painted to ward off harmful forces during the night. Mothers would especially place such charms near their children's beds, believing that the young were more vulnerable to spiritual intrusion. The most feared dreams were those thought to be sent by an enemy's magic. Curses in ancient Egypt were not just threats muttered in anger. They were precise rituals, often involving figurines, inscriptions, and incantations designed to harm someone even as they slept. The victim might be plagued night after night with visions of failure, illness, or misfortune, until their waking life began to crumble. In such cases, priests skilled in countermagic would be summoned to unbind the dream, using purification rites, offerings, and the recitation of protective texts to sever the link between the dreamer and the curse. Interestingly, Egyptians did not shy away from confronting their nightmares directly. Some magical papyri record instructions for facing the spirit in the dream, to challenge it, command it in the name of a god, or transform into a powerful animal within the dream to drive it away. This suggests that for the ancient Egyptians, even a nightmare could be turned into an act of spiritual power. For them, dreams were a battleground as much as a temple. One never truly knew whether closing their eyes meant receiving divine guidance, or stepping into the lair of something far more dangerous. In ancient Egypt, a pharaoh's dream was never treated as a private matter. It was a matter of state, a vision that could sway the course of an entire kingdom. The ruler was the bridge between the gods and the people, so if the gods sent a message in the night, everyone listened. Some dreams were so powerful that they became immortalized in stone. One of the most famous belongs to Thutmose IV, a young prince who, according to legend, fell asleep in the shadow of the Great Sphinx. As he drifted into slumber, he experienced a vivid vision. The Sphinx, known to the Egyptians as Horemakhet, a manifestation of the sun god, promised him the throne if he cleared away the sand that had buried its body. Thutmose awoke, convinced it was a divine command. He ordered the excavation immediately, and soon after, he became pharaoh. Whether or not the dream truly foretold his rise, the dream stele he erected between the Sphinx's paws ensured that the story would be remembered for millennia. Other pharaohs received dreams in times of crisis. Some were warnings of disaster, floods, famine, or enemy invasions, while others brought reassurance, as if the gods themselves were pledging victory. Ramses II, the great builder and warrior king, was said to have been visited in his sleep by the god Ptah before a decisive battle. The god assured him that the divine forces of Egypt would march with him, giving him courage when dawn came. Not all royal dreams were so straightforward. Some were cryptic, requiring the skill of temple dream interpreters to untangle. A strange vision of stars falling into the Nile, for example, might be interpreted as a political upheaval, while a dream of blooming lotuses could mean fertility and prosperity for the land. In these cases, the pharaoh's decisions, whether to go to war, change policy, or launch great building projects, might depend entirely on the priest's interpretation. To the people of Egypt, these visions were proof that their ruler was chosen and guided by the divine. A dream could legitimize a claim to the throne, unite the people in faith, or even inspire monumental acts that reshaped the kingdom. In the pharaoh's bedchamber, the fate of Egypt might be whispered in the stillness of the night and written into history by morning. While the pharaoh's dreams shaped the destiny of the kingdom, ordinary Egyptians also sought divine messages in their sleep, but they had to work for them. This practice, known today as dream incubation, involved deliberately sleeping in a sacred space to invite the gods to speak. It was a deeply personal ritual, yet it was rooted in a belief system that tied every Egyptian, rich or poor, to the divine. The process often began with preparation. A person in need, perhaps someone suffering from illness, seeking justice, or longing for guidance, would purify themselves through fasting, bathing in sacred waters, and making offerings at the temple. These offerings could be food, incense, or finely made figurines representing the petitioner's plea. Once cleansed and prepared, they would spend the night inside the temple precincts, often in a special chamber dedicated to the god known for sending dreams. One of the most famous destinations for this practice was the Serapeum, where the Apis bull, a living manifestation of the god Ptah, was venerated. Pilgrims believed that sleeping in the presence of such sacred power increased their chances of receiving a vision. Others traveled to temples of Imhotep, the deified architect and healer, whose spirit was believed to guide the sick to cures through dreams. The night itself was a solemn affair. The sleeper might lie on a simple mat under the flickering glow of oil lamps, surrounded by the faint murmur of priests chanting prayers. The air would be heavy with the scent of incense, the rhythmic sound of the Nile outside mixing with the rustle of palm leaves in the wind. At some point, in that space between waking and dreaming, the divine would appear. Sometimes the god spoke directly, delivering a clear message or instruction. Other times, the dream came in symbols, animals, colors, landscapes, which the dreamer would later have interpreted by temple priests. Inscriptions left behind by grateful petitioners describe miraculous outcomes. A woman might dream of a serpent touching her forehead and awaken cured of a long illness. A farmer could see a vision of overflowing granaries, only to find a bountiful harvest that season. Whether or not these events were divine intervention or coincidence, to the Egyptians, the dream was proof of the god's care. This practice blurred the line between personal faith and state religion. It meant that divine communication was not the privilege of kings alone. Even a humble fisherman could, in the right place and under the right circumstances, hear the gods whisper in his dreams. In ancient Egypt, a dream was never just a dream, but its true meaning could be elusive, locked away in symbols and signs that only trained minds could fully understand. This gave rise to a special group within temple society, the dream interpreters. These were priests, scribes, and scholars who held the keys to decoding the language of the gods. Their role was both spiritual and political, because the way a dream was explained could shape personal decisions, public policy, and even royal decrees. The interpreters worked from a mixture of tradition, observation, and an extensive body of written knowledge. They relied heavily on dream books, collections of recorded visions paired with their established meanings. One such text, the Chester Beatty Papyrus, contained hundreds of entries. Dreaming of a crocodile might mean victory over enemies, while seeing yourself drinking beer could be an omen of coming joy. But the interpretation wasn't just mechanical. Priests considered the dreamer's social status, current events, and the god believed to have sent the message before giving their verdict. For the priests, this power was a double-edged blade. On one hand, they were guardians of sacred wisdom, helping people navigate life through divine counsel. On the other, they were gatekeepers, capable of shaping dreams into messages that served political or religious agendas. A warning dream could be framed as a call to obey temple law, while a blessing might be tied to increased offerings to a particular deity. In the royal court, a cleverly interpreted dream could legitimize a pharaoh's decision, or undermine a rival's position. The dream interpreter's chamber was a place of both mystery and authority. Petitioners would approach humbly, recounting their dreams in detail, while the scribe listened intently, quill in hand. The priest might close his eyes in silent prayer, consult a scroll, or pace slowly before speaking. When the interpretation came, it was delivered with an air of certainty, even if its meaning was deliberately vague, leaving room for events to unfold in ways that still seemed prophetic. In a society where the gods were believed to be ever-present, interpreting dreams wasn't simply a service. It was a sacred duty that bridged the mortal world and the divine. And for those who controlled that bridge, influence reached far beyond the walls of the temple. For the Egyptians, the night was never an empty pause between days. It was a living, sacred journey, one that began with care, intention, and reverence. Each small action before sleep, whether lighting a lamp, sipping an herbal brew, or placing a protective amulet nearby, was a thread in the great tapestry of cosmic connection. Every breath under the stars brought them closer to the divine. And as their dreams faded with the rising sun, they awoke not with the jolt of alarm or the weight of unrest, but with the gentle certainty that they had been cradled by the gods, healed by the night, and prepared to greet the new day with renewed strength and peace. Perhaps that is the lesson they leave for us, that sleep is not simply rest, but an act of harmony with the world around us. A time to return to the cosmic balance, to the whispers of the stars, and to the deep, quiet well of our own being. So as you now drift toward your own night's rest, remember the quiet rituals of ancient Egypt. Let the noise of the day fall away, breathe in the stillness, and feel the gentle pull of the universe guiding you into dreams.